I did enjoy being at the Mars Hill congregation this morning with them and doing their special service, their Church Eat Church service today. But I'm glad to be back. And one of the best things about being the visiting preacher is what? You know what it is, right? You get to eat first. And I mean, when you know how we go over there, you know, when it's time for our meal, we go over there, and a lot of you go home, and that's fine, and get your casserole or chicken or whatever, and warm it up, and we wait for about 45 minutes after service is over to eat. I was waiting around after service, just greeting people, shaking hands, and they come got me and shoved me through. 3 minutes after the amen, I had a plate in my hand. Man, that was awesome. And I enjoyed being out there with them, and did the special service with them. Got to see a lot of faces I hadn't seen in a while, but it is good to be back home. We've been looking throughout the last few months on the differences, the different aspects that Christ plays in our life. We sang, I walk with the King. We've looked at Christ as our King. We've looked at Jesus as our high priest. We've looked at the deity of Jesus. We looked at His human side. We looked at how He was the Christ child, that He was a young boy, as a human being, as a child, and how He continued to be like a normal kid would be. And how He matured into that process of becoming the Jesus as we know today. And there's all kinds of things that we could look at. How He's the bread of life, how He's the vine, how He's the good shepherd, and we've looked at all of those. There's a whole other side of Jesus that we see in the chapter that Dee Dee read just a few moments ago in Matthew chapter 26, if you'll turn there. And it's an unexpected Jesus. It's really not one that we could see because we know the story, and we've always been taught the story and how it progresses. But if you're a disciple, if you're one of these 12 disciples, or now 11 disciples, because Judas has gone out of the room. And remember, from the moments where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, where Jesus talks about how Peter's going to deny Him, and where Jesus talks about how the betrayer is among them, and they eat that last meal, that there's about 4 or 5 chapters there that only take place in about the span roughly of just a few hours. And how for all these chapters, we got a chapter here and a chapter here, and we may have weeks between those chapters. Here we have just hours between 4 and 5 chapters, depending on which account you read. And how it's a very crucial time that Jesus is, instilling in these disciples these last few words of instruction before He's gone. But not only that, it's His last few moments of His life that He is having to deal with. And this whole point of His ministry has been built around everyone else. Helping, showing compassion, showing that love to everyone else. But in these few minutes that we have recorded of this prayer that Jesus says, His focus, I don't want to say it's selfish. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's selfish. But He is focused on Himself, asking if there is a possible way something else could be done. And if the disciples could have heard the prayer, they would have said, this is not what we would have expected. This is not the Jesus we're used to. Because we see a different side. I want you to pick up again in verse 36. And let's read it again. Jesus went to the place called Gethsemane, and He said to His disciples, you sit here while I go over and pray. He took with Him Peter and 2 sons of Zebedee, that would be James and John. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. He said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. Going a little farther, He fell on His face and He prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Hold this in your Bibles and look over to Luke's account. Luke 22, verse 40. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and he prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like giant drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he arose from his prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." Look at verse 47. And while he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading him. He drew near to Jesus and he kissed him. Man, we're talking minutes. We are talking minutes that Jesus has, that he spends in this prayer before the events begin to snowball into his death. And it's unexpected because we see things that we haven't been typically shown of Jesus. We're going to see pain that he's in. We're going to see the suffering that he's in on the cross. But before, the apostles had not seen that. One other time we read in Scripture that I can recall off the top of my head, and there may be more, but at least I know one other time we read of Jesus being troubled in the Spirit, being in agony in his spirit. And that's when Lazarus is dead. And that's when Jesus is troubled because of their lack of belief in him. And it says he's troubled so much that he weeps, he cries, and he has a little bit of frustration, and he cries out, "Father, I know that you always hear me, but because of the people standing here, this is what I'm about to do. Lazarus, come here." So here's a different side. So I want us to look at this Gethsemane experience. I want to look at what happens here, and I want to show you the Jesus that we see. There's three quick things that we see in Jesus here. Number one, we see Jesus in sorrow. Back in Matthew 26, 36 through 38. He said to them, verse 38, "My soul is very sorrowful." Not just sorrowful. It's very sorrowful, even to death. The word sorrowful, I want you to note this, in the Greek means to distress, to be sad, to cause grief, to grieve, to be in heaviness. That's going to mean something in just a second, I think. To be troubled, which is another version that's read here. To be in distress of mind, to be full of heaviness, to be very heavy. Then you have the exceeding sorrowful, or the very sorrowful. Grieved all around, that is to be intensely sad to the point of death. It also comes from a word that means to us, nauseated. So I want you to envision Jesus. I want you to feel the same thing. I know you can't feel it exactly, but try to imagine the feeling that Jesus has while he goes off to pray in Gethsemane, that he feels so heavy that he is. I don't know if it means you're just heavy or if it means you're just without strength, and it's very difficult for you to even lift your head up. That's how he feels, and he's almost to the point of being nauseated even. That's where we get that word, being nauseated. You know that feeling when you're nervous about something. Maybe when you're waiting the test results from the doctor, or you know something bad has happened and you don't know what to do, and you feel this weird feeling in your stomach that you're about to just throw up, that you can't even hold your food in because you're so upset. This is bothering you. You're troubled so deeply. Jesus here is at the point where he says, I would just as well rather die right now than have to go through this feeling that I'm feeling. Guys, that's a heaviness. That's a feeling that none of us want to experience. And yet it's displayed for us here with Christ. And when you're in this situation, well, Luke 22:44, what we just read, the sweat drops of blood. Now we know that is a medical condition, that under great distress, tiny blood vessels will rupture in the sweat glands, and it will have this blood that's mingled with sweat as it comes out. Whether that was metaphorically speaking, where it says in some versions, like sweat drops of blood, that it was kind of metaphorically speaking, or whether it was actually the case, which I believe it was. You see that distress that he's in. Well, why is he in this distress? Why is he in this? Is he afraid of death? Is Jesus really afraid of death? It seems weird to me that he would be afraid of dying, or rather, that he would be afraid of death, because he's built this up with the apostles over and over again. And he just talks about it flippantly to them, laying that seed, I'm going to die for you. And this coming 3 days, I'll be in a tomb, and then I'm going to rise again. And he knows what's going to happen. He's not doubting his ability to be risen from the dead. But just because you know the outcome doesn't make the pain of getting to that outcome any softer, does it? It doesn't. Try to explain this to kids. You got to get a shot. I don't want a shot. If you get a shot, you'll feel so much better. But I don't want a shot. But no, you don't understand. If you get the shot, that will help get the medicine in your body quicker, and you'll be able to feel better quicker. But that doesn't negate the pain of the shot for the child, does it? Somebody like Miss Betty, who's going through therapy right now with her knee. From what I'm told, knee therapy of coming off knee replacement is one of the most painful things that a man or a woman could go through. And that's going to hurt. And you can sit there and tell them and say, you know what? If you go through this therapy, you're going to feel great at the end. That doesn't take away the pain of having to deal with it when you're doing it. Jesus is not afraid of death, I don't believe. I think he is afraid of the dying part and what it's going to take to get to that. And then you've got the whole sin thing. You've got the whole thing of he's so not accustomed to sin at all, so anti-sin, the antithesis of what sin is, and yet he's going to carry the sin of the entire world. It's like he's going to be bathing in filth, bathing in sewage and vomit. You look at that and you think, I don't want to go anywhere near that. And yet that is the way sin is perceived to the pureness of Christ. And he's going to have to take that. Oh, he don't want to do that. He knows he has to do that. He's willing to do that. But as for just excited, gung-ho, let's go do this and take care of business, that's not what we see. We see, notice the plea. What does he ask of the disciples? When you feel that way, when you feel that kind of sorrow and heaviness and that pit in your stomach that you're going to be, you're just nauseated and you're just sick, you want somebody there with you, don't you? You don't like to be alone. Notice what he asked of his disciples there in Matthew chapter 26. My soul is very sorrowful even to death. Remain here. Watch with me. Jesus, I don't want to read too much into this. Jesus is asking for Peter, James, and John to help him. Stay here. Stay with me. Because I'm hurting. I am grieved. I don't want to be alone right now. That's unexpected. And I don't think that takes anything away from His deity or His power to say that. I think it means it all the more to me. We see His struggle. Verse 39. I'm going a little further. He fell on His face and He prayed, saying, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as You will. Jesus is opening up. He's totally honest with the Father. He's not putting up a front. He's not trying, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. His Spirit is opening up to the Father, and He says, Father, if there is any way possible, there's a struggle going on within me because I don't want to have to go through this. And He even says it. Who better to know this feeling than Jesus when He goes to the disciples and rebukes them for being asleep? When He says, the Spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is not. It is weak. Jesus knows that feeling. His Spirit is to do the will of the Father. He knows that's what He needs to do. He knows that's what He has to do. But His flesh, that struggle within Him, just like Paul says in Romans 7, the very thing I do I hate, it's pulling at Him. He's battling that within Himself. Of trying to put His human body into subjection to His mind. Look at how we pray. Do we ask as though we can handle the struggles on our own? Do we ask God to really help us? Or do we think that's too small for God to help, that we can just do it on our own? If this teaches us anything, if Jesus struggles with something like this, so can I. So can I. And if Jesus solicits the Father for help, so can I. In Max Lucado's book, Angels Were Silent, he talks about the struggle this way. The final encounter of the battle has begun. As Jesus looks at the city of Jerusalem, He sees what the disciples can't. He sees the evil one preparing for the final encounter. Hell is breaking loose. History records it as a battle of the Jews against Jesus. And that's what we see. We see the battle of the Jews going before Pilate, carrying Jesus, putting the false witnesses up, throwing them out there. History records it as the Jews against Jesus, but it wasn't. It was a battle of God against Satan, and Jesus knew it. He knew that before the war was over, He would be taken captive. He knew that before the victory would come His defeat. He knew that before the throne would come the cup. He knew that before the light of Sunday would come the blackness of Friday. And He is afraid. Now, there might be those out there that consider that a blasphemous statement. But I don't. I think He was afraid. Not of the unknown, not of what was going. He knew what was going to happen, but that doesn't negate the pain He's going to feel. And you imagine in your mind knowing that this is God versus Satan. And the victory is there. But before that victory comes, has to come the darkness of Friday and Saturday. It's like soldiers going to war. You don't feel great about it. You know you got to do it. And it's that feeling of heaviness. We see Jesus in struggle. We see Jesus in submission. Not my will, but as You will. Again, verse 42, the second time He went away and prayed, My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, then Your will be done. If there's no other way, that's another way, that's how we'd say it in the 21st century. God, if there's no other way, then I'll do what You want me to do. And He knows He has to. Again, from that book, I've just been reading excerpts this week from it. And He knows what it's like to beg God to change his mind and to hear God say so gently but firmly, no. For that is what God says to Jesus, and Jesus accepts the answer. How many times have we prayed for an answer and got the answer no and rebelled against that? Here's the Father, Christ, the Son, coming to the Father, asking for something, and God firmly but gently saying, there is no other way, Son. You have to do this. And Christ accepted it. Hebrews 5 says, although He was a Son, He learned through obedience. Although He's deity, He went through that. He learned the submission aspect through that obedience. John 10, 17 through 18, where He says, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I might take it up again. Nobody has the power to lay down that life but me. And if I have the power to lay down my life, He says, I have the power to take it back up again. He knows that submitting to the will of the Father is the ultimate thing that He has to do. But that does not make that going through it any sweeter. In Luke chapter 22 that we slipped on over there earlier, it says that when this happens, verse 43 of Luke 22, listen, when He prays, nevertheless not my will, but yours be done, and there appeared to Him an angel from heaven strengthening Him. I don't know what that angel did. I would love to have known what that angel did, how he did that. If he just wrapped his arms around Jesus, wrapped his wings around Jesus, or if the angel carried down the message from the Father and said, God said no, that you have to do this. But you can do this. You know you can do this. I don't know what that was. But the angel comes down and gives him that strength, that supernatural response from God that he gets for that encouragement. And after that strength, you go back to Matthew 26. After that strength, this is what happens. Verse 45. Or 44. Well, let's do 43. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for a third time, saying the same words again. See that determination? He did this 3 times. He prayed this prayer 3 times. Then he came to the disciples and said, sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand that the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. After being strengthened in that prayer, he comes up from that prayer. He goes to the disciples and he says, guys, wake up. You're going to have plenty of time to sleep later on. Right now, something needs to be done, and it needs to be done soon. Look, here they come now. It's almost like he's psyching himself out for the events that are fixing to take place. Guys, I hope that these are 3 quick little points that to me say a tremendous amount about a side of Jesus that we're not used to seeing. But I think it's pivotal that we see. Because He is the Son of God. He is God with skin on Him. God in the flesh. But at the same time, the will of the Father had to be played out in His death, in His loss. And we have to respect the feelings that Christ has that leads up to this point. Not only that, but what happens after this? When they grab Him, when they slap Him, and they ask Him, who hit you? Which one of us hit you? Prophesy and tell us which one hit you. When they spit on Him, when they beat Him, when they get these false witnesses, when He's standing before Pilate, and all these accusers, they're asking Him all these questions, and how does He respond? Not a word. He keeps quiet because He knows that's what the Father wants from Him. Now we can learn a lot from this. And I hope it's helped, but we can learn so much from this because we can see that if Jesus was in sorrow, He knows how to... When you look at the Corinthian letter, chapter 1, I believe it's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, where it talks about how God is the God of all comfort because He comforts us in ways that only He can. Maybe that's because of the suffering that Christ went through, and Christ knows how we might feel in any given situation, and He's able to comfort us with the comfort that the Father gave to Him through this. He knows our struggle. He knows our pain. He knows our sorrow. But then at the same time, He knows that we must submit. And if we submit, we'll see the glory in the end. This Jesus, He's a special thing that we have. Special man, special God that we have. And for us just to take for granted even the little blessings that we have from Him, that's blasphemous. That's what's blasphemous. So think about your life tonight, and you take the lesson today and learn from it, apply it to your life, and see what you can do with your life to learn from the suffering, the sorrow, the struggle, submission that Jesus had. We offer an invitation tonight if you're subject to it. If you need to submit your will to His tonight, then by all means you do it as we stand and sing the invitation song.